Congratulations on surviving another year and welcome back to Twisted Metal Month. This year is shaping up to be just as exciting as the first year, so hop in your favorite vehicle of destruction and buckle up. This year we are starting off strong with Twisted Metal Black, one of the most popular releases in the whole franchise. But to get here, we had to slog through the muck and the mire. Twisted Metal's 3 and 4 were taken over by in-house studio 989, the studio that worked on various sports and extreme sports games before taking the Twisted Metal helm from Single Track, the original team that created the series. In my opinion, Twisted Metal 4 was, and still is, the worst game in the series by far, taking bottom-of-the-barrel ideas and wonky mechanics and physics and plopping them on a disc. After just scraping by the bare minimum of earning a greatest hits release, Sony decided a change was necessary to keep the series moving in a more positive direction. Out of the ashes of the defunct single-track studio came a new team of developers called Incognito Entertainment. Scott Campbell, one of the lead developers behind Twisted Metals 1 and 2, founded the company in 1999, recruiting many of the original developers for the new studio. In the year 2000, Incog signed a publishing agreement with Sony, who would ultimately place the future of Twisted Metal with the same team that created it in the first place. All eyes were on the PS2, meaning there was a heavy focus on developing games for that platform. According to Jaffe and Campbell, much of the industry was leaning toward bright colors and cartoony graphics. Instead of following market trends, Incognito went in a completely opposite direction, creating a grimdark world of horror-based characters locked inside of an asylum. Jaffe said Sony pushed back on content that was deemed too extreme and much of it was cut from the game. Take for instance the Preacher character.
There were things I wanted to do in Black that they wouldn't let me do, and some of it was just so... Okay, some of it was valid, right? We had a scene with the Preacher who thought he was performing an exorcism, but he was crazy. He was really being asked to perform a baptism, and so he drowns this. Well, we had this great shot of, and I have kids, right? I love kids. I'm a nice, gentle guy, but it's a fantasy, right? And in the scene, there was this great shot of him pushing this little, 5-day-old into the baptismal, into the water, and his little arms and chubby little legs are kicking around in there, and he's just like shoving the thing down there, because in his mind, he's like exorcising this demon.
What is left is still pretty eerie, making me incredibly curious about what has never been seen by the light of day. Characters range from being inspired by other media to being unique twists on well-tread tropes. 10 characters are unlocked by default. Returning are characters like Needles Kane driving the Sweet Tooth ice cream truck, of course. Darkseid returns for the first time since Twisted Metal 3, but driving it is newcomer Dollface. Mr. Grimm returns, only this time he is a Vietnam veteran who is forced to eat his friend after being trapped in a pit. By the end of the game, Grimm realizes he actually craves human flesh and becomes a pseudo-Grim Reaper as he hunts for his next meal. The Yellow Jacket taxicab is finally back after being cut from Twisted Metals 2 through 4, and is now driven by Charlie Kane's son, who wonders where his dad is. There are plenty of other returning cars that have been staple from the beginning with new drivers behind the wheel, but 3 new vehicles are added and their drivers are completely new as well. No Face is a character whose eyes, nose, and mouth are removed. A plastic surgeon steals his face after losing money betting on him to win a boxing match. His wish for winning the contest is revenge. Billy Ray Stillwell was a farmer until one day a plane spewing toxic chemicals leaves his fields barren, and after returning home he finds his wife with the pilot. Billy wants to get revenge on him. Lastly is the Preacher mentioned earlier. He wants the demon that lives inside of him to be purged because of all the terrible things it has made him do. Calypso, per usual, is running the show, only he doesn't do much talking this time around. Instead, the contestants describe him in their own words, adding to the mythicality of this version of the character. At first, I thought Calypso owned and operated Blackfield Asylum in order to cultivate his own cookie jar of diseased people to draw from. However, in one of the stories, it is revealed that he had to kill all the guards to make his way to the contestants and release them. After letting the people loose, the world of Twisted Metal Black starts to take shape. As opposed to previous games, Twisted Metal Black takes place in one connected city known as Midtown, where each arena takes up a different region of the town. The first arena is always the junkyard, but as the player moves through the rounds, they are given the opportunity to choose which levels to play in. The power of the PS2 allowed for more realized arenas. In the documentary The Dark Past, creative director Kellen Hatch said he's always loved the suburb level in Black because the PC-rendered vision was more or less fully realized in the full game thanks to the new power they could access. And I would agree, there are some excellent levels here. My favorite is also that suburban level. It feels huge because of the mountains with winding streets and the carnival area complete with a destructible Ferris wheel that rolls away if you shoot it. Some of the other highlights were the abandoned skyscraper with the satanic church. There is also this incredible level on the prison transport boat where you start off in a cell with 2 other drivers, but as time goes on you're released from the cell and have full access to the ship, and then the boat docks and lets you get off and fight on land. It's incredibly dynamic, and you can tell a huge scope was the focus in a lot of these levels, and this one is the perfect example of that. And now that the game is on PS2 and saving your game is a given, you have new ways of unlocking characters. Instead of using cheat codes, you have to explore different environments in order to find where they are hidden. For instance, manslaughter is hidden in the hull of the transport boat. You have to destroy a shipping container to make a ramp, and then shoot the side of the boat, revealing a secret room. To get Axel, you have to choose the freeway level to fight on, angle yourself in a specific direction, and shoot down the crane outside of the playable space. There is so much to like about this game, and I get why it is so many people's favorite. However, I think there is one area where I think this game trips up a little bit: the gameplay. I thought I was rusty after a year of not playing Twisted Metal. By the end of last year's video, I was blasting through tournaments no problem with basically any character I wanted. But when I started playing Black, I found it so difficult to line up shots. The vehicles felt really slippery to control and turn, almost feeling like I was out of control. But then after listening to Jaffe talk about Black, I realized that maybe I wasn't so off the mark after all.
So what I was in love with on Twisted Metal Black was the world. And I think because of that, the gameplay actually suffered. It was too hard. It wasn't creative enough. We really tied ourselves up being forced to every level having the same color palette of browns and blacks and grays and clouds in the sky rolling by. And I think the core experience, the interactive experience of that game really suffered because of it.
In The Dark Past, Jaffe said by the time the team was working on Black, he was bored of the gameplay loop. Instead, he focused solely on making the atmosphere and characters great. The gameplay is not bad, just to be clear. It just feels very different from the games before and feels a little bit less precise. I'd even chalk it up to my personal preference. The healing station from Twisted Metal 1 return and work twice per round while smaller bits of health can be picked up and respawn periodically. It creates a bit of strategy for the player to decide whether or not they want to go for the small bit of health now or use one of the 2 chances to restore all of it. Another welcome change was the directional button combo attacks you can use to freeze enemies, shoot napalm, go invisible, and do other things as well. Black was pretty popular and reviewed well, but it never received a sequel. Development did start on a follow-up called Twisted Metal Harbor City. There were ambitious ideas for an entirely interconnected world as a battleground, but the game was eventually scrapped. We can look at a few of the levels that were being worked on as part of the Twisted Metal Head-On Extra Twisted Edition. A portion of content called Twisted Metal Lost allows you to play through the levels, but we will get to those later when we get to Head-On. Twisted Metal Black is awesome. Outside of the gameplay feeling pretty different from previous games, it's easily one of the best games in the series. I'll continue to keep playing it for the incredible atmosphere, the horror elements, and the compelling and weird stories the characters present. If you're a Twisted Metal fan, you probably have already played this, but if you haven't, you really need to. While Twisted Metal Black was the flagship new release for the team behind Incognito's return to the franchise, Sony still had a large player base on the PlayStation 1. They thought the older siblings would upgrade to the PS2, leaving the younger siblings with the original console as a hand-me-down. Sony wanted to capitalize on that audience, and so the company ordered a second Twisted Metal game that would release in 2001, just a few months after Black, that was much more approachable to kids in tone. This means that when the PS1 finally went out of production, there were 5 Twisted Metal games on the console. I love this series. That is too many. While initial reports and speculation expected a demake of Black for the old hardware, Small Brawl would end up being very different. Twisted Metal Small Brawl looked a lot more in line with the market trends that Black shirked in favor of dark and twisted stories and characters. Small Brawl is a much brighter and cartoonier release in the series, trading rolling hunks of metal shooting fire and bullets for pint-sized RC cars. Instead of Calypso taunting drivers into killing each other for life-changing wishes that usually backfired, here he is a playground bully who muscles his way into forcing the local kids to partake in his own tournament.
If you ever want to see your sneaky widow Froggy again, you gotta play my game!
He still grants wishes though, they just happen to be at lower stakes. The new theme of remote-controlled cars means these small machines will be duking it out on playgrounds, kitchens, treehouses, movie theaters, and so on. Small Brawl is a controversial entry in the series for its wacky tone. I can understand that, especially after you compare it to the creepy tone of the game that was released mere months before. Kids fighting on the playground before they get called into dinner understandably doesn't create a ton of suspense. With this game, a lot of people either really like it or really consider it a bust. I actually genuinely thought it was a pretty clever riff on the formula, and I think there is more overlap between design choices between this and Black than initially the game was given credit for. Both of these games were developed in close proximity, similarly to how Twisted Metal 1 and Warhawk were made at the same time, and the teams kind of fed off each other while developing. In the level design, there is a certain amount of care here that I think was lacking in the 989 Twisted Metal games, especially in 4. Granted, there is only so much you can do on a PS1 in 2001, but extra little features ensure the tone is consistent across the game. Some of the dynamic elements from Black and Twisted Metal 2 are here. In the movie theater, if you blow up the popcorn machine with a rocket, it rolls down the center aisle and rams into the screen, revealing health and weapon pickups. In the kitchen, if you fire napalm at the plumber's butt crack, he blows the kitchen island down, revealing Darkseid as an unlockable character. Even something as small as changing the icons from rockets and gas cans to more childish icons builds out a consistent tone. Like, I can absolutely imagine a bunch of neighborhood kids racing around their different RC cars, shooting Roman candles and bottle rockets at each other's toys without thinking of repercussions. Minion, the ever-present boss fight, is missing, likely because a murder demon doesn't fit the tone Incog was going for. Replacing him is Piecemeal, a former contestant who takes pieces of his fallen rival's cars and attaches them to his own, making a rolling piece of abstract art. There is also Trapper, the mid-boss enemy you can unlock by beating the game as every character. His trademark is shooting monkeys at the player, like the ones from A Barrel of Monkeys. Given how hot and cold people are on this game, I wanted to bring in a second opinion. This person is playing through this series for the first time, and after seeing how our videos were going to overlap during this month, I was excited to hear what he had to say about Small Brawl. Was he like me and thinking it was good, or did he despise it? Let's hear from him in his own words. Welcome Blue Tag to the channel.
Hey, so I've been playing the Twisted Metal series, working my way up to this one. And this one was interesting. I know a lot of people love this game and I can definitely see why. I really love how the game has a Toy Story feel to it, and I can definitely see myself playing that as a kid. With that being said, I'm not a kid anymore. It's 2022 and it's my first time playing it, and wow, it is hard to play this one after playing Black. And don't blame me, I'm playing on the release order. I think it's only fair to compare it to the Twisted Metal games on the PS1 instead of Black. But still, I'm not the biggest fan. While the framerate got way better, the render distance for the cars, at least for me, was extremely low. And I had some trouble adapting to the controls. Mainly when changing between forwards and reverse while moving left and right. It feels a little bit weird when you're off the ground. And it just seems really close to Twisted Metal 2, but there's just something really off about it. The game isn't hard as expected, but the level hazards can definitely catch you off guard. Now trust me, I can definitely see why so many people love this game. But at the same time, I can also see why so many others believe this one to be one of the worst in the series. While I've been loving Twisted Metal, this one just wasn't for me. And honestly, considering it was made for kids, I guess it just wasn't really supposed to be.
Those were all pretty excellent points, and I would definitely agree that how much you like this game depends on how much you like the RC car tone. As much as I do appreciate small Brawl, I do have a few issues with it. I think the weakest part of this game has to be the characters and the stories associated with each one, but that was bound to happen, I guess. There is only so far you can push the envelope when the main audience is kids.
Okay, Hammerhead, you really want to be a rock star, huh? Totally, dude. You asked for it, headbanger. Huh? Wait.
Mr. Grimm has always been a favorite character of mine, but here he is just a kid who is obsessed with Halloween. It's cute, but it's a far cry from the Eater of Souls from earlier games. Needles Kane, however, enters the contest to get an ice cream truck, and I'm sure we all know how that ends.
Man, you could have had anything you wanted, and all you could think of is a little ice cream? Let me down! Stop the car! Who's the old lady?
Most of the stories end with kids asking Calypso to stop bullying them. Not my favorite game story-wise. I think I took to this game a bit more than Blue Tag did because I personally like RC car games. I played Revolt for the channel and talked about the lively community keeping it going, so going from classic Twisted Metal to this very nerfed image of what the series wasn't an immediate deal breaker for me. I mean, it certainly isn't my favorite, but I do think it's a fine, perfectly playable game. I think that if you do get past the theme, the underlying reuse of the Twisted Metal 2 engine that was tweaked to make it a little bit more arcadier makes it a pretty solid experience. But Blue Tag also disagreed with me there, so mileage may vary. As strange of a tone as it tries to set, I think the care that went into crafting it really makes this game greater than the sum of its parts. Without the little details, I don't think I would have regarded it nearly as highly as I do.
Oh, and of course, thank you so much Under 10 Hours for inviting me here. If you haven't subscribed to this guy, what are you doing?
And thank you, Blue, for helping me with my first collaboration. Everyone should also subscribe to his channel in the description below. He's been absolutely killing it with videos lately, and he's helped unlock some memories of games I played when I was a kid. Go check him out. It's hard to believe we are past the halfway point of Twisted Metal month this year. This is an exciting point for me personally because Twisted Metal Head-On was my first TM game. In 2006, I got a PSP for my birthday, and the first game I ever played on it was Head-On. Before then, I'd never had a Sony system, so classic vehicles like Spectre, Thumper, and Twister were all brand new to me. But I was hooked from the get-go, the vibrant graphics and smooth gameplay drawing me in. But to get to this release in the series, we had 6 other games paving the way, each one involving tweaks to the formula and atmosphere to get here. Twisted Metal Head-On would be the only game made and released on a handheld, and one of the first-party launch titles for the PSP, as the new handheld tried to make a splash in the Nintendo-dominated market. But just because it was shipped on a handheld doesn't mean corners were cut. In fact, Head-On was the first game in the series to ship with online multiplayer baked in at launch. Online play on the PSP. Incredible. The developers took this release very seriously, and the way they approached the gameplay is a testament to that. It is treated by the team as a true successor to Twisted Metal 2. In terms of themes and table setting, the Twisted Metal competition is once again a worldwide tour of mayhem, with arenas spanning from LA to Greece to Egypt to Russia. The arenas feel surprisingly large considering the console it was released on, and there are dynamic environmental elements to each. In the first level, Big Blue Stadium, a band is playing a live concert while the battle unfolds. Placing a remote mine next to them and blowing it up stops the music, for a lack of a better term that avoids demonetization. In Egypt, you can blast down the walls of the pyramids and reveal an interconnected system of tunnels with health and power-ups. Head-On retains the level of scale and verticality as well, making the game feel less like a watered-down recreation of a main game, and more like a full PS2 game squeezed onto a portable system. something the PSP was very good at doing. While Jaffe got bored of the mechanics during Black's development, gameplay feels refreshed in the new game. Every time you kill an opponent, they drop one of a few kinds of upgrades. Machine guns became much more powerful, you can earn new abilities to make your special attacks pack more of a punch, you can get an armor upgrade that doubles your vehicle health, and there are plenty of others. In different levels, you can also play mini-games that challenge you to complete tasks in order to unlock bonus stages. It might be my ample time spent with this game back in the day, but gameplay feels excellent. You really have fine control over your vehicle, and you can fling even the heaviest vehicles around on a dime. The story mode follows a similar structure to previous games, with Calypso promising one wish to the winner of the Twisted Metal competition. Everyone from Twisted Metal 2 returns besides Minion. However, Crimson Fury is back from Twisted Metal 1. Replacing Minion is Cousin Eddie in his RV.
Shitter was full!
ATV riders circle him and protect him, and to fight him, you have to take them all out. Doing so lets you enter the contest as one of those riders. A reworked version of Darktooth from Twisted Metal 2 returns as well, this time supporting a chompy bit that will crunch you like a jacked up Mr. Slam. In total, there are 18 vehicles and characters, and 17 of them have their own unique stories and wishes. Similarly to the comic-style movies in Twisted Metal 2, the movies are structured as moving pictures. This likely made it easier to fit on a UMD while also appearing as an homage to the second game. My only gripe is that I personally don't like the art style of the scenes. They get the job done, they just look a bit too clip-arty to me. As a portable game, Twisted Metal Head-On is an excellent iteration in the series, but it wasn't just a handheld release when all was said and done. During the life of the PSP, multiple exclusive games made the jump to PS2 and got a second life. In some cases, these games had extra content added to sweeten the deal for users who already had these games. Head-On was similar in that regard, as it received its PS2 port 3 years after the original release. Weirdly enough, this was 2 years after the PS3 was on the market. In the time between the PSP and PS2 releases, Incognito folded into the official lineup of Sony Studios, and from this company's staff rose Eat, Sleep, Play. Scott Campbell and David Jaffe teamed up once again, and the studio's first release was the PS2 port of Head-On. The Twisted Metal Head-On Extra Twisted Edition is packed with a ton of bonuses. Head-On received a brand new arena, Transylvania, complete with a castle full of traps. Most of the content, however, is added outside of the existing Head-On game. This version contains Twisted Metal Lost, the 4 finished arenas from Twisted Metal Harbor City. There is another suburban level, a stadium, a carnival, and a harbor. These levels are introduced with a similar tone as Black because it was supposed to be a successor to that game. The mode explains that the game was canned because the developers were in a plane crash and perished before the game was finished. A mysterious note was received by Sony explaining that the content should be released as an homage of sorts to the deceased. Completing the 4 levels will let you read the letter. This is, of course, an urban legend and never happened. Rather, it was supposed to make the game more mysterious. Luckily, this means no one was actually harmed. Additionally, there is Sweet Tour, where you control Needles Kane as he moves through an asylum on foot, picking up concept art and trivia about the series. This was supposed to be the basis of a 3D platformer that was never officially confirmed to be in development. There is a lot of video content added as well, including the original endings for the first Twisted Metal games that had not been released previously before this. Lastly is The Dark Past, the documentary about the development of the series up to Head-On's release. After years away from this game, it was a ton of fun to revisit it. It's the game that sparked my love for the series originally, and getting to play a bunch of extra content and learning more about how the games were made the Extra Twisted Edition a huge new experience. As a sequel to Twisted Metal 2, there is a lot to like for fans of that game, while also providing some of the most meaningful improvements to gameplay since the addition of the directional combo attacks through upgrades and overall capturing the feeling of control I have from Twisted Metal 2. Twisted Metal Head-On is still awesome. We've reached the final stretch of Twisted Metal Month, and not a moment too soon. 10 years ago, Twisted Metal went dormant. After a full stretch of 7 years between Head-On and 2012, all that released was a port to the PS2. But the developers at Eat, Sleep, Play were busy. For 3 years, the development of a new Twisted Metal game was underway, slowly evolving into the final game we received on the PS3. However, the original scope and direction changed drastically multiple times through development. At one point, the game was supposed to be a post-apocalyptic battleground under the working title Twisted Metal Apocalypse, until Scott Campbell decided that direction wasn't working. Additionally, the scale of the game was going to be much smaller, as the team was aiming for a digital-only PSN release. That is, until Sony took notice of the progress being made on the game. The game once again changed direction and scale to a full-blown release, a multiplayer-only game like MAG, which, due to its reliance on online servers, means every copy is landfill fodder now. Thankfully, Sony came to Eat Sleep Play and said enough people like the Twisted Metal universe that they need to have stories and a dedicated single-player mode. And thus the game that started as a digital-only game turned full-release multiplayer experience now was a full-on Twisted Metal game. At E3 2010, an event deeply etched into my brain, David Jaffe and Scott Campbell emerged from a full-scale creation of Sweet Tooth that drove onto stage for the announcement. The presentation was focused on online play, touting a 16-player deathmatch mode. But here in 2022, none of the online features are accessible as the servers were taken offline in 2018. That doesn't stop Sony from yelling at you about buying an online pass, a gross reminder of some of the worst nickel and diming of that era. What's left is what's on the disc, and what is on the disc is probably the most different Twisted Metal game by far. Calypso returns once again as the head of the Twisted Metal tournament. He seems to be the CEO of a large corporation, and keeps artifacts from previous drivers' stories as mementos of his ruination. It's a subtle thing, but seeing his wall of knickknacks, like the potion of Yellow Jacket's drink from the first game's cut ending, or the boxing glove from No Face's ending in black, made me think this game was supposed to be a nod to fans of the entire series. The biggest difference, however, is that this time around only 3 drivers are playable and their narratives take place over one long story mode. The stories are told via live-action sequences that harken back to the B-movie style and campiness of Twisted Metal 1's cut endings. The 3 characters you play as are Needles Kane, Mr. Grimm, and Dollface from Twisted Metal Black. Each of the drivers enter the contest for their own specific reason. Needles is a former family man whose dark side took over, urging him to kill his family. His daughter got away, leaving the job unfinished. Her escape taunts him endlessly, and no amount of bloodshed satisfies his rage until he can kill her. His wish is to find her and put an end to his craving once and for all. Mr. Grimm enters the contest to prevent the death of his father, the event that sent his life down a dark path. His father was a stuntman like Evel Knievel and died after botching a stunt. His wish is to go back to the night of the crash and prevent it from happening. Dollface wants to be the most famous supermodel in the world, and she will kill anyone in her path. After a car crash leaves her with a scar on her face, she consults a doctor that traps her in a mask. Her wish is to be freed from the mask. The stories are alright, but sometimes they skew onto the edgy side just for the sake of trying to sound cool.
My name is Daniel Grimm, and I'm an asshole.
That is so hilariously stupid, but overall they were very fun. With only 3 characters, you might be wondering how there can be more than 3 vehicles in the game. The way Twisted Metal 2012 works is completely different than the games that led up to it, and it shakes up gameplay dramatically. In this game, the characters can drive any car of their choosing. At the beginning of the basic deathmatch, you choose 3 different vehicles as well as the sidearm you want, making it the first game that lets you use something other than machine guns mounted on your car as a secondary weapon. You can use shotguns, SMGs, and RPGs instead, and they all have pros and cons. Many of the classic vehicles return, just without their drivers. Some of them even return with a new coat of paint. In all, there are 17 vehicles you can pilot. The Meat Wagon reminds me of the Ghostbusters Ecto-1, Roadkill looks like a demolition derby car. During gameplay, if your vehicle gets damaged, you can pick up health like in games past. Most levels have a garage where if the damage is too great, you can swap vehicles while the first one is repaired. It never gets any less weird seeing Needles Kane and Axel's wheels. The bulk of Twisted Metal plays out the same. Take out a set number of opponents and move on to the next stage. The arenas are gigantic, like absolutely colossal. The amusement park level has roads that wind up a mountain to a funhouse. The city level is huge with blocks upon blocks of roads with a connected subway system lying beneath it. It also has this ice rink, which is the worst part of any Twisted Metal game ever. There are 8 main arenas in the game that make up 30 different maps. Black Rock Stadium is a murder pit of Calypso's own creation, complete with electric floors, swinging death balls, and he eventually fills the lower levels with lava. The LA skyline takes place across rooftops and is really reminiscent of Twisted Metal 1, 2, and Black. There is so much variety to the stages that every single one stayed fresh throughout the whole playthrough. Now let's talk about something that's been a make or break for me throughout this whole series: gameplay and the feel of it. The best games provide a certain weight to the vehicles while also letting them turn on a center axis when stopped as part of a quality of life change added in too. At first this game took some getting used to. Cars feel a bit lighter and more hollow than I initially liked, but once I got used to it, the game started to feel pretty good. The directional combos for freeze rays, shields, and mines have been simplified by assigning them to individual directions on the D-pad. As you progress through the game, you unlock more moves as well. I ended up absolutely loving this game. It's fast-paced and its difficulty ramps up evenly as you go through the story. Cars have their own unique specials with alternate special attacks, which I realized far too late into the game. I especially loved Mr. Grimm's special, which involves setting a chainsaw on fire and launching it at enemies. If you get good with it, you can absolutely obliterate everyone in your path. Just look at this kill spree I was on. All the weapons in the game pack a punch, and ramming into other cars feels great. The game is well balanced so that most vehicles are viable options, although for me I lean toward the tankier vehicles paired with the Grimm motorcycle. Different events require different strategies, however. There aren't only death matches in this new game anymore. There are death races that require you to drive as fast as you can to the finish line. If you don't, boom. There are levels where semi-trucks spawn new enemies until you destroy them. There are endurance challenges where you have to crush a specific number of infinitely spawning opponents too. Granted, that doesn't feel entirely distinct from a regular deathmatch. Lastly, the boss fights return in various fashions. In Sweet Tooth's campaign, you fight the Brothers Grimm, two monster trucks that attack you in unison. During Mr. Grimm's chapter, you face down a flying metal doll face, and to bring her down you have to sacrifice other drivers to a grinder and launch a nuke at her. This mode was majorly advertised for the online component of the game, and I can imagine it was a pretty fun change of pace among friends online. But the wildest boss level comes in Dollface's chapter. In order to beat the story mode, you have to ascend this rolling carnival of horrors and destroy the Sweet Tooth creation. Choose the wrong vehicle like I did, and it's a nightmare. But overall, I was hugely impressed by this game. For something that started as a multiplayer-only release, the single-player mode holds up pretty well. My only genuine gripe with it is how few characters there are. I wish there would have been more DLC characters with their own stories to play as, but as far as I can tell there were only 2 vehicles that were supposed to be extra content, but they were never released. When all was said and done, I loved Twisted Metal 2012. I didn't plan on playing the entire story mode in one sitting, but I did. I wanted to see what happened next the whole time, and I wanted to see what new modes I would be tasked with figuring out. Had there been a more traditional number of characters and stories, I think there could have been an argument that this is one of the best Twisted Metal games in the whole series. But with only 3 characters to play as, there is very little to do now that I have finished it. I feel like that one sitting showed me all there is to do for the single player mode. There is a split screen mode to play couch co-op battles, but as someone who doesn't get a chance to do that very often, this game doesn't offer me much more. I can imagine though that in the game's heyday I would have played the hell out of it. It's just too bad I'm playing it now and not 10 years ago. I am happy we got to finish Twisted Metal Month on a high note this year after ending it on Twisted Metal 4 last year, the worst game in the series. So what's next? We've covered the whole series now. There can't be more to do next year, right? Oh, wrong. We have a brand new Twisted Metal TV show coming out next year. And do you think this series was the only car combat game in town back in the day? Wrong again. And we get a chance to go back to what the original team at Single Track was doing in between their split with Sony and the formation of Incog Inc. We have a lot of content still on the way, so stay tuned for next year's iteration of Twisted Metal Month. Thank you all so much for watching. This is one of my favorite series to do, and while it was delayed a little bit, and I wanted to do a little bit more than what ended up happening, I still loved every second of playing these games. What's up, everybody, and welcome to the alternate ending of Twisted Metal Month 2022, something I started last year on the Supercut, where if you make it this far, you are rewarded with some behind-the-scenes info on what it was like to make the series. I've done this 3 times now because I'm trying to record at work, and it is not working. But pardon the terrible audio, pardon the fact that I've done this 3 times, and let's get into it. Twisted Metal month this year was a little bit stressful because right when I was about to film a sequel to the skit from last year, for people who watched the first video, I got COVID. That's been a long recovery that I wasn't expecting. I've had like respiratory issues, chronic cough, and shortness of breath that I'm still kind of dealing with. So that's why at the end of the videos this year, I didn't really do an outro, because by the time I was done recording voiceover, I was just completely shot by the end of it. But with that said, this year's Twisted Metal month was fantastic. After last year and being so middling on 3 and pretty down on 4, I was pretty ready to be done with 4 especially. That really killed a lot of the fun I was having because it was the last one and it was so bad. But with this year, it was so much better. I mean, we started off really strong with Twisted Metal Black. Such a different game in the series, a lot of people's favorite. It's great. Then we went to Small Brawl, which, as polarizing as it is still really good because underneath the very controversial playground aesthetic, it is still a Twisted Metal game. It uses the Twisted Metal 2 engine, which is really cool. It still feels good. I think it was better. I think it's better than people give it credit for. I'm gonna be honest. Head On, I grew up with. I used to listen to my iPod video while playing PSP and Twisted Metal Head On, which is the most 2005 thing anyone has ever said. And I think the biggest surprise of this month, it was 2012. I mean, it was fantastic. I didn't expect to love it the way I did. It did so many interesting things and changed up the formula so much. It's really a shame that after all of that work they put into it, that was the end of the series as far as we know. I know we got stuff coming out next year, which I'll get to in a sec, but really loved that game. I think if it would have come out a little bit later in the era of Battle Royales, where you could have 25 cars enter, 1 leaves, would have been really interesting. It's really a shame because I think that game is pretty forgotten and it has every right to be remembered. So what does Twisted Metal Month look like going forward now that we're done with the series and all of the releases, even the spin-off? We have some interesting... We could go 2 different directions, really. There's a show coming out, which is going to be very interesting. I have no idea what to make of it so far. Very little is known besides some of the casting. There's another game coming out from the Demolition All-Stars team. I think that's the name of it. I'm a little bit hesitant on that. I have no idea what the quality of that game was. I know it didn't do well when it launched on PS5. I didn't have a PS5, so therefore I did not play it, but I was intrigued. I don't think it was I wasn't as turned off as some people were by it. That said, I don't want to judge the team. I don't think that's fair. But it'll be interesting to see. I'm always a little bit hesitant when a series is taken away from the original creators and given to somebody else. I mean, we saw that with 989 especially. They did not know what they were doing by the end of their run with Twisted Metal. So I think it'll be interesting to see which direction this series goes from here. But as opposed to that, if neither of those things make it out next year and they get delayed to 2024, 2025, we still have all of the competitors to Twisted Metal. We got Vigilante 8. We have we have the spin-off that Single Track was working on when 989 was working on Twisted Metal, Road Trip Vacation 2012. That's kind of like Twisted Metal 3 in itself. So it'll be interesting to look at. I've actually never played it. I haven't played it yet because I want to save it for that. But there's a lot of ways this series is going to go. It's going to turn into more car combat month probably. It'll be through the lens of Twisted Metal, but it'll be like what's going on at the time. But there aren't any more Twisted Metal games, of course. So I don't want to. I don't want to keep making the same videos over and over. So we're not going to like restart the series or anything like that. But before I go, I just want to say thank you all so much for watching. There were so many people who showed up after last year that it's been really humbling and exciting that people took to this series last year the way that they did. The channel was much smaller then, so I was very surprised and excited that so many people came back this year. Thank you all so much for that. I'm excited. I love this series so much, and I'm glad it resonated with some people in the way that it did. So until next year, take care, and I'll see you then.